The pink frosting on Emma's birthday cake wasn't perfect. I knew it the moment I set it on the table. My hands had been shaking while I decorated it at 6 a.m., trying to make something special for my daughter's 7th birthday. The unicorn horn tilted slightly to the left, and the rainbow stripes weren't as straight as I'd hoped. "Oh my," Diane, my mother-in-law, said loudly as guests gathered around. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at my homemade creation. "Is that supposed to be a unicorn?" She turned to her daughter Amanda with a smirk. "Remember the professional cake you got for Lily's party last month? Now that was artwork." Amanda giggled behind her hand. "Mom, stop," she said, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but a few chuckled along. Heat flooded my cheeks as I stood frozen beside my imperfect cake. Emma tugged on my dress, confused by the tension. My heart hammered in my chest. 3 years of marriage, and Diane still found new ways to cut me down. But this was Emma's day. I couldn't make a scene. I forced a smile and started cutting slices, my hands trembling slightly. Then my husband Mark stepped forward and took the microphone from the DJ station. "Hey everyone," Mark said into the mic, his voice carrying across our backyard. He flashed that easy grin that had made me fall in love with him. "Thanks for coming to celebrate our little princess." He started with a light-hearted joke about how Emma had insisted on inviting her stuffed animals to the party. A few people laughed, and I felt myself relax slightly. Maybe he was just going to do a normal father's speech. But then Mark's eyes found mine across the crowd. He saw my red cheeks, the way I was gripping the cake knife. His smile faltered for just a moment as he took in my expression. The laughter around us began to die down as people sensed the shift in mood. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'd been married to him long enough to recognize that look. Something was building behind his eyes, something I'd never seen directed at his family before. "Actually," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "there's something else I want to—" Diane suddenly appeared beside him, reaching for the microphone with a bright smile. "Oh, let me say something too," she interrupted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Diane snatched the mic before Mark could protest. She cleared her throat dramatically, commanding the attention of every guest in our backyard. "I just want to say a few words about what makes a truly special celebration." She gestured toward Amanda, who stood near the gift table in her designer dress. "Now, Amanda here knows how to throw a party. Professional catering, custom decorations, store-bought perfection. She's such a wonderful mother, always going the extra mile for her children." My stomach dropped as I realized where this was heading. Amanda's smug smile widened as she basked in the praise. Several relatives nodded approvingly. "Some people," Diane continued, her eyes finding mine with laser precision, "think homemade is good enough. They think effort matters more than results." Her laugh was sharp and cutting. "But children deserve better than lazy shortcuts, don't they?" The backyard fell silent except for Emma's voice asking someone about the bounce house. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. I felt like I was shrinking into the ground, every insecurity I'd ever had about my parenting on full display. Mark's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching from where I stood. A voice cut through the awkward silence. "This is cruel," muttered my cousin Alex from near the drinks table. He wasn't trying to be loud, but in the quiet backyard, everyone heard him. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being too sensitive or overreacting. Someone else could see what was happening. Alex caught my eye and shook his head in disgust, making no effort to hide his disapproval of Diane's behavior. Diane's face flushed slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, Alex, always so dramatic," she said with a forced laugh, finally handing the microphone back to Mark. But the damage was already done. The guests were looking at her differently now, some with open disapproval. Amanda moved closer to her mother, her smirk faltering slightly as she read the room. But then she seemed to remember her role as Diane's ally and stepped toward me with renewed confidence. "You know," Amanda said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "you really should learn from someone who knows what they're doing. Maybe next time you could ask me for tips." The condescension in her voice made my hands shake with anger. I couldn't take another second of standing there while they tore me apart. I mumbled something about checking on the food and fled toward the house. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I pushed through the sliding door into my kitchen. The coolness of the air conditioning hit my hot face as I gripped the counter, trying to steady my breathing. This was supposed to be Emma's special day, and they'd turned it into another opportunity to make me feel small. To my surprise, 2 guests followed me inside. My neighbor Patricia and Mark's Aunt Helen closed the door behind them and looked at me with sympathy. "Honey," Patricia said gently, "that woman has been trash-talking you for years. We've all noticed it." Helen nodded vigorously. "At every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday. She finds a way to cut you down while building Amanda up." "It's gotten worse since Emma was born," Helen added. "Like she can't stand that Mark chose you to be the mother of his child instead of finding someone she approved of." My hands trembled as their words confirmed what I'd suspected but tried to ignore. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and suddenly I could hear Diane's voice drifting in from outside. I moved closer to the door, Patricia and Helen flanking me as we listened to Diane holding court by the dessert table. Her voice carried clearly through the gap. "The thing about controlling a family," Diane was saying to a small group of relatives, "is that you have to train them young. I've been working on Mark since he was a boy. He knows better than to openly disagree with me, even if he married beneath himself." My blood turned to ice. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Amanda learned early too," Diane continued smugly. "She knows how to play the game, how to make herself look good while others look bad. It's all about strategy. Mark's wife will either learn her place or make herself miserable fighting it." "Mom," I heard Amanda say with a nervous laugh, "maybe you shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" "Tell the truth? I've been managing this family for 35 years. One little girl from nowhere isn't going to change that." Footsteps approached the door. My heart hammered as I realized someone was coming inside. I stepped back just as Mark pushed through the sliding door, his face pale. He'd heard everything. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. Shock, hurt, and something that looked like betrayal flickered across his features. His mother's words hung in the air between us like poison. "She really said that," he whispered, though Patricia and Helen were right there as witnesses. His voice cracked slightly on the words. "About training me? About you being beneath me?" I nodded, unable to speak. For 3 years, I'd tried to tell him about his mother's behavior, but he'd always brushed it off as misunderstandings or accidents. He'd grown up with her manipulation and couldn't see it clearly, but now he'd heard it with his own ears. Mark ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from times when he was deeply troubled. "I thought," he started, then stopped. "I always defended her when you tried to tell me. I thought you were being too sensitive." The pain in his eyes made my heart ache. This was the moment I'd both longed for and dreaded. I'd wanted him to see the truth, but I'd never wanted him to hurt like this. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you." Instead of anger, his voice held determination as he turned back toward the door. We walked back outside together, Mark's hand protectively on my lower back. The party was in full swing, with kids running around the bounce house and adults chatting in small groups. But Diane was still at the dessert table, clearly feeling victorious after her kitchen speech. She looked up as we approached and smiled that fake sugary smile she always wore. "There you are. I was just telling everyone how important it is to have realistic expectations for homemade treats." Another dig. Right to my face in front of my husband at my daughter's party. But this time Mark didn't miss it. This time he was ready. "That's enough," Mark said sharply, his voice cutting through her words. The conversation around the dessert table stopped dead. Guests turned to look at us, sensing the tension. Diane's smile faltered. She wasn't used to Mark speaking to her in that tone. In 35 years, he'd never publicly challenged her authority. "Excuse me," she said, her voice rising with indignation. "Don't you dare talk to me like that, young man. I am your mother." The words carried across the backyard like a slap. Several guests stopped their conversations to watch. Mark stepped closer to his mother, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet backyard. "You are my mother, and I've always respected that. But you are also a guest in my home at my daughter's party, and you will not disrespect my wife." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amanda moved to stand beside her mother, her face flushed with anger. "Mark, you're being ridiculous. Mom was just..." Mom was just humiliating my wife in front of our family and friends, Mark interrupted, not taking his eyes off Diane. I heard what you said in the kitchen, Mom. About training me. About my wife being beneath me. About controlling this family. The color drained from Diane's face. She hadn't realized he'd overheard her private gloating. Amanda's mouth fell open in shock. This stops now, Mark continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. My wife spent hours making that cake with love for our daughter. She planned this entire party, decorated our home, and invited all of you to celebrate. And you've repaid her kindness with cruelty. Murmurs of agreement began spreading through the crowd. Cousin Alex nodded approvingly. Patricia squeezed my shoulder supportively. Mark, honey, Diane started, but he held up his hand. She's making you weak, Diane hissed, her mask finally slipping completely. The sweet, concerned mother act disappeared, replaced by cold fury. Can't you see what she's doing to you? Turning you against your own family. Several guests took a step back, shocked by the venom in her voice. This was the real Diane, the one I'd been dealing with in private for years. Now everyone could see her true face. Mark's response was immediate and unwavering. No, Mom. Respecting my wife doesn't make me weak. It makes me a better man. A better husband. A better father. His words rang across the backyard with absolute conviction. What makes a man weak is letting his mother bully the woman he loves. What makes a man weak is choosing comfort over courage. Amanda's face twisted with rage. How dare you, she spat. After everything Mom has done for you, for this family. What has she done? Mark challenged. Besides create drama at every gathering? Besides making snide comments about my wife's cooking, her clothes, her parenting? Besides teaching my daughter that love comes with conditions? The truth hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Amanda opened her mouth to argue, then apparently couldn't find words. She spun on her heel and stormed toward the house. Diane's face went through several expressions before settling on a strained smile. She looked around at the watching guests and forced out a laugh. Oh, Mark, you're being so dramatic. It was just friendly teasing. Just jokes between family. But the guests weren't buying it anymore. Too many of them had witnessed her behavior over the years. Too many had seen the pattern of cruelty disguised as concern. Mark stood firm beside me, his arm sliding around my waist. Those weren't jokes, Mom. Jokes are funny to everyone, including the person being teased. What you did was mean-spirited and intentional. I've been watching this for 3 years, called out Mark's Uncle George from across the patio. Every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. It's not teasing when it's constant and one-sided. Other relatives began nodding and murmuring in agreement. Diane's eyes darted around the group, realizing that her usual allies were staying silent. Even her sister-in-law avoided her gaze. You're all being ridiculous, Diane said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. I was just trying to help her improve. A voice from the crowd cut through her excuses like a knife. We've all seen how you treat her, burst out Patricia, my neighbor. She'd had enough of watching the drama unfold. At the school carnival, you told everyone she wasn't much of a baker when she donated cookies. At Christmas, you criticized her gift choices. At Emma's last birthday, you complained about the decorations being too childish. Other guests began nodding vigorously. The floodgates had opened, and years of witnessed behavior came pouring out. I remember that Christmas, added Helen. You made her cry in the kitchen and then told everyone she was too emotional. And the Easter egg hunt, called out another guest. You said she spoiled Emma by hiding eggs that were too easy to find. Each example hit like a hammer blow. Diane's face grew paler with each accusation. She looked around desperately for support, but found none. Even the guests who had chuckled at her earlier jokes now looked uncomfortable with their participation. Amanda had returned from wherever she'd stormed off to and stood beside her mother, looking trapped and furious. The perfect mother-daughter alliance was cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. Mark turned to me, his eyes soft with apology and determination. Do you want to say it, or should I? Before either of us could respond, Emma's clear voice cut through the adult tension. She'd left the bounce house and wandered over to us, probably wondering why all the grown-ups were standing around talking instead of watching her play. Mommy, she said, tugging on my dress, Can I make a wish now before we cut the cake? My heart melted. Even in the middle of this family drama, Emma was still just a 7-year-old excited about her birthday. Of course, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to her level. Emma closed her eyes tight and whispered, but in the quiet backyard, everyone heard her words. I wish Grandma Diane would stop being mean to Mommy, so Mommy wouldn't cry in the bathroom anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. My face burned with embarrassment and heartbreak. I thought I'd hidden my tears from Emma, but children see everything. Diane's face contorted with fury. Even the child has been brainwashed against me now, she sneered. This is what happens when you poison a kid's mind with lies. The cruelty of blaming a 7-year-old for stating the truth she'd witnessed was too much. Something snapped inside me. I stood up slowly, my shaking hands reaching for the microphone that was still sitting on the DJ table. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have as I lifted it to my lips. This ends today, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 3 years of swallowed insults, of crying in bathrooms, of making excuses for behavior that had no excuse. All of it was about to pour out. Diane lunged forward, her face twisted with panic and rage. Give me that, she demanded, reaching for the microphone. You have no right to. But Mark stepped smoothly between us, his tall frame blocking his mother's path to me. She has every right, he said firmly. This is her home, her daughter's party, and her chance to finally speak her truth. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. For the first time in their relationship, Mark was physically standing between his wife and his mother, choosing sides in the most public way possible. Diane's eyes widened with shock and betrayal. Mark, you can't be serious. After everything I've done for you. Let her speak, he said, not moving an inch. I gripped the microphone, looking out at the faces of family and friends who had watched this toxic dynamic play out for years. My voice shook slightly as I began, but grew stronger with each word. I've spent 3 years trying to be the daughter-in-law Diane wanted. I changed my hair when she said it was too long. I learned to cook her favorite dishes when she criticized my recipes. I smiled and stayed quiet when she made jokes at my expense because I didn't want to cause problems. Several guests nodded, remembering incidents I was referencing. Patricia had tears in her eyes. But it was never enough. Nothing I did would ever be good enough because the problem wasn't my cooking or my decorating or my parenting. The problem was that I existed. That Mark chose me instead of someone she could control completely. That's not true. Diane interrupted, her voice shrill with desperation. I just wanted what was best for my son. I didn't lower the microphone. What was best for your son was a wife who loved him and supported his dreams. What was best for your granddaughter was a mother who adored her and worked hard to give her beautiful memories. But you couldn't stand that. Mark stepped closer to me, his hand touching my elbow in support. She's telling the truth, Mom. As if my words had broken some kind of spell, relatives began speaking up from different corners of the backyard. The stories poured out like water through a broken dam. I remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago, called out Mark's cousin Brian. You made her cook the entire meal and then criticized every dish in front of everyone. And last Christmas, added Helen, you opened her gift to you and said, "Oh, how creative," in that tone that made everyone uncomfortable. The baby shower, Patricia said from beside me. You spent the entire time telling stories about how much better Amanda's pregnancy went. Each story was a nail in the coffin of Diane's careful image management. For years, she'd counted on people being too polite to speak up, too uncomfortable to call out her behavior. But Emma's innocent birthday wish had broken the spell. Amanda tried to jump in, defending her mother with increasing desperation, but even she couldn't explain away years of witnessed cruelty. This family deserves honesty, Mark said, his voice carrying clearly across the backyard. We deserve to celebrate each other instead of tearing each other down. We deserve to protect the people we love instead of sacrificing them for someone else's ego. Diane looked around frantically, searching for allies who were no longer there. Diane's face was red with humiliation and rage as she realized she was losing control of the narrative she'd carefully constructed for years. In her desperation, she played her final card. Fine, she spat, pointing a manicured finger at Mark. If you want to choose sides, choose. It's either me or her. Your mother who gave birth to you and raised you, or this ungrateful little nobody you married. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment she'd been building toward for 3 years, forcing Mark to prove his loyalty by sacrificing his wife. She was so confident in her hold over him that she smiled smugly as she waited for his response. Mark didn't even pause to consider. "I choose my wife and my daughter," he said without a hint of hesitation. Every time. Without question. Forever. The speed and certainty of his response hit Diane like a physical blow. Her smug smile crumbled into shock, then rage. She'd played her ace and lost everything. "You'll regret this," she whispered, but the words lacked power. She was no longer the family matriarch commanding respect. She was just an angry woman having a tantrum at a child's birthday party. "No," Mark said quietly. "I'll regret not doing it sooner." Mark took my free hand and reached for Emma's with his other. "Come on, ladies," he said, his voice warm despite the tension. "Let's go inside for a minute." As we walked toward the house, something unexpected happened. Applause. It started with Cousin Alex, slow and deliberate. Then Patricia joined in, then Helen, then others. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and supportive. We were almost to the sliding door when Diane's voice cut across the backyard like a siren. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Both of you. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Amanda grabbed her mother's arm, trying to quiet her, but the damage was done. The mask had fallen completely, and everyone could see the manipulative, vindictive person beneath the sweet grandmother act. Mark stopped at the door and turned back. His voice was calm but carried clearly across the yard. "The only thing I regret is how long it took me to protect my family from you." We stepped inside, closing the door on the chaos behind us. Emma looked up at us with wide eyes. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Mark knelt down and hugged her tightly. "No, sweetheart. We're finally free." The days following Emma's birthday party brought a flood of support I never expected. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from relatives who had attended the party. Most of them were apologetic and encouraging. "I should have spoken up years ago," texted Mark's Uncle George. "Diane's behavior toward you is inexcusable, and I'm sorry for staying silent." "You handled that with more grace than she deserved," wrote Cousin Brian. "The whole family has been talking about how she's treated you." Even relatives who hadn't been at the party reached out after hearing about what happened. Apparently, Diane's treatment of me had been a topic of private conversations for years, but no one had felt comfortable addressing it directly. Amanda tried to defend her mother on social media, posting long rants about ungrateful daughters-in-law and disrespectful children. But her posts backfired spectacularly when family members began sharing their own stories in the comments. The tide of public opinion had turned completely. Diane went from being seen as the devoted grandmother to being recognized as the family bully she'd always been. But the real test came 3 days after the party when my phone rang and Diane's name appeared on the screen. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling slightly as Diane's name flashed on the screen. Mark looked up from his laptop and saw my expression. "Want me to answer it?" he asked, already reaching for the phone. I nodded, curious to hear what she would say but not ready to face her venom directly. Mark put the phone on speaker and answered. "Hello, Mom." The voice that came through the speaker was barely recognizable. Diane was screaming so loud the phone speaker crackled with distortion. "How dare you embarrass me like that? In front of the entire family. I will never forgive either of you for this humiliation." She ranted for several minutes about ungrateful children and manipulative wives, her voice getting shriller with each accusation. It was like listening to a recording of every private tantrum she'd probably thrown over the years when people weren't around to witness them. Finally, Mark interrupted her. "Mom, if you can't speak respectfully about my wife, then you'll lose contact with both of us and Emma. You can't keep me from my granddaughter," she shrieked. "Watch me," Mark said calmly and hung up the phone. The silence that followed felt like freedom. That evening, Mark and I sat at our kitchen table and established new boundaries. It felt strange but empowering to finally take control of our family dynamics. "No contact with Emma unless Mom agrees to family counseling and demonstrates real change in her behavior," Mark said, making notes on a legal pad. "No surprise visits. No gifts sent without permission. No social media posts about Emma or our family. I added my own requirements. And if she wants to be part of Emma's life, she needs to apologize publicly for her behavior at the party. Not a fake "I'm sorry you were offended" apology, but a real acknowledgement of what she did wrong. The rules felt fair but firm. We weren't cutting Diane off permanently, but we were making it clear that her access to our family would depend on her willingness to change her behavior. Amanda called that night, alternating between tears and anger. She couldn't understand why Mark was choosing a stranger over family. But Mark patiently explained that I wasn't a stranger. I was his family now, and protecting his wife and daughter was his priority. "She's not the same person you married," Amanda argued desperately. "You're right," Mark replied. "She's stronger now, and I'm proud of her for it." Word spread quickly through our extended family and social circles. The story of the birthday party confrontation became a cautionary tale about toxic family dynamics. But instead of damaging our reputation, it seemed to enhance it. "I have so much respect for how you handled that situation," wrote one of Mark's colleagues who had heard the story. "Standing up for your family takes real courage." The guests who had witnessed the party became our inadvertent advocates, defending our actions whenever anyone questioned them. Patricia told everyone at the school pickup line about Diane's years of hidden cruelty. Helen shared the story at her book club, where several women revealed their own experiences with toxic in-laws. Even Emma's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, pulled me aside to express her support. "Emma's been so much happier in class this week," she said. "Children pick up on family stress more than we realize." Amanda made one last desperate attempt to salvage her mother's image, creating a group message with several family members where she tried to paint me as the villain. But the relatives who had witnessed the party shut down her lies immediately, sharing specific examples of Diane's behavior that contradicted Amanda's version of events. The tide of support felt overwhelming after years of feeling isolated and gaslit. Amanda's final gambit was a social media campaign designed to turn public opinion against us. She created several posts painting herself and her mother as victims of my manipulation and Mark's betrayal of family values. But her strategy backfired spectacularly. The relatives who had attended the party began commenting with their own stories about Diane's behavior over the years. The comment sections became a catalog of witnessed emotional abuse. "I remember when she made you cry at Emma's first birthday," wrote cousin Brian. "She criticized everything from the decorations to the food to your parenting in front of everyone. And the Christmas she told everyone your gift was thoughtless and cheap while you were standing right there," added Helen. Each comment painted a clear picture of the systematic bullying I'd endured. Amanda tried to delete the negative comments, but screenshots had already been taken and shared. Within 24 hours, Amanda had deleted all her posts and blocked several family members. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had instead exposed her mother's behavior to an even wider audience. Diane, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. No calls, no texts, no social media activity. According to Mark's uncle, she'd stopped attending family gatherings and was apparently too humiliated to show her face. The silence felt like victory. 3 weeks after Emma's birthday party, our family gatherings had transformed completely. Without Diane's toxic presence poisoning every interaction, relatives were more relaxed and genuine. Conversations flowed naturally without the undercurrent of tension that had always existed before. "I can't believe how much more fun these family events are," Mark's Uncle George confided to me at a cousin's barbecue. "We were all walking on eggshells around Diane for years, trying not to set her off." Emma flourished in the new atmosphere. She laughed more freely, spoke up more often, and didn't seem to be constantly checking adults' faces for signs of anger or disappointment. The anxiety she'd been carrying, anxiety I hadn't even realized she had, seemed to melt away. Mark was different too. The constant stress of managing his mother's emotions and protecting me from her attacks had taken a toll on him that only became apparent when it was gone. He smiled more, laughed easier, and seemed lighter somehow. "I should have done this years ago," he told me one evening as we watched Emma play in the backyard. "I should have protected you from the beginning." "You did what you thought was right," I replied. We both learned something important about boundaries. The peace felt almost surreal after years of drama. 2 months later, we threw Emma a redo birthday party. Just close friends and the family members who had supported us held in our backyard with decorations Emma chose herself. The atmosphere was pure joy without any undercurrent of tension or judgment. I made another homemade cake, this time a rainbow layer cake that was absolutely imperfect and absolutely perfect at the same time. The frosting was still a bit crooked, the layers slightly uneven, but Emma's face lit up when she saw it. "It's the most beautiful cake in the world," she declared, and I believed her. Mark gave a toast with the microphone, thanking everyone for their love and support. "This is what family should feel like," he said, looking around at the genuinely happy faces. Safe, supportive, and full of love. No one criticized the cake, the decorations, or my parenting. Instead, they celebrated Emma and the joy of being together without drama. As I watched my daughter blow out her candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her happiness, I realized something profound had shifted. I was no longer the daughter-in-law desperately seeking approval. I was no longer walking on eggshells or second-guessing my worth. I was finally free to be myself, imperfect, homemade cake and all. And it felt absolutely perfect.